everyone, and welcome back to Backlot Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel. Today, I am joined by my old-fashioned co-host, Tanner Dykstra, and today we're here to talk about Horizon, an American Saga Chapter 1 directed by Kevin Costner and starring Kevin Costner. We're here to talk about the Western event of the decade, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
What other... I guess like No Country for Old Men. There are some other like
those are neo westerns.
This is a true-blooded American Western.
Oh boy, is this an American?
Kevin Costner is here, putting a Western out in theaters, and we sat down yesterday and watched it for all 3 hours of its runtime. We're here to give you our thoughts, but Tanner, they should subscribe and like the video and all of that. And stick around, of course, because Horizon American Saga Chapter 2 releases in August.
What we should do is do a next time on our review at the end of this episode.
Predict what we want to think of the second one? Interesting. Tanner, what do you think of Horizon?
Horizon an American Saga Chapter 1,
correct,
that is. I would say, Tucker, that Horizon an American Saga Chapter 1 is not a good movie.
Yes.
We've discussed this, and we'll sort of rehash our thoughts here a little bit in this review, but ultimately, it's certainly not well put together.
Yeah.
I've never been a fan of Kevin Costner as a director.
Yeah.
We did a full review on his Best Picture winning Dances with Wolves.
And he hasn't done many other movies.
No, he has like six director credits,
and like half of them are now Horizon.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, it's not well put together. I don't think it's especially well directed. It's a little bit of a mess in terms of narratives because there is quite a few of them, as we'll talk about. But individually in each story, it's perfectly fine, but nothing stands out to me in particular, and ultimately all just suffers because of the fact that we don't get a lot of any particular story here.
Yeah, so Horizon American Saga Chapter 1 is the start of many American Western stories.
Yes.
They are not connected as of now. They may be connected down the line.
We'll see.
I would assume.
Yeah.
But what we get in Horizon Chapter 1 is just stories in the Old West.
Yes.
People setting up settlements and going to the Oregon Trail. And it has its own flavor because it is a Western in the year of our Lord 2024.
That's right.
This is a genre that has been bygone for longer than we've been alive, frankly. I mean, even like the couple of Westerns that were able to sort of revive it, like Unforgiven in like the, what was that, the 90s, I think?
Yeah, 1992.
There are a few Westerns that have tried, but largely the American audience has lost the taste for Westerns, and I never had the taste for Westerns. I've eaten some of the best Westerns of all time, films by with like starring John Wayne and spaghetti Westerns and things. I've seen these movies and I'm like, Westerns just aren't for me.
Stop waffling about Westerns. What do you think of Horizon?
I'm trying to set the groundwork because I find this project very compelling.
Of course.
I find it very distinct. I find watching this movie, I'm like, Kevin Costner cares so much about this.
He does.
He put his all into this for years.
And tens of millions of dollars of his own cash as well.
But I don't like this movie.
Yeah.
Because it's an interesting movie to discuss. But I still don't like it at the end of the day. Like, I will talk about Horizon. I will talk about the fact that this feels like it should be a TV show.
Yep.
It feels like, this is a movie out of time because they're trying to do a Western in the 2020s. We'll talk about the fact that the second chapter is releasing in just a few months, and there are like twice as many movies planned. We'll see if they get made. But everything about this is so interesting. But I actually think the movie itself is maybe the least interesting aspect of it.
The content of the film is not very interesting at all. So let's just talk about that.
Yeah. There are what? We just
four.
There are four. There are really 3.5.
Yeah.
Core stories in this film.
So let's talk about the one that has Kevin Costner in it first.
Yeah, sure.
That's the one that I think was advertised probably the most. Because getting his face out there.
I assumed that this was going to be all about him. Frankly.
So did I.
Yeah.
I didn't know that this was like an anthology sort of story. So what that comes out of is so the very opening of the film is Jenna Malone's character sort of shooting and killing her father and stealing her child and then running away, and that turns into
kind of stealing if it's your child.
I guess so. Well, stealing away.
Yes.
Anyway, so that years pass and then
sort of the narrative sense.
She has settled down with her husband and their friend?
Yeah, they're not related.
Whose name is Mary.
Yes.
And eventually, as it comes to pass, Jenna Malone's character's brothers come to town, find her, and want to seek revenge on her.
Yeah.
And what happens there is Mary takes the kid, meets up with...
We're breaking down Horizon's all full spoilers, apparently.
Yeah. Mary takes the kid and meets up with Kevin Costner, and then they're on the run.
Yeah.
So that's what it is.
Well, so the interesting thing about this is I understand why your mind went to, I have to set the groundwork for this, because this storyline is not clearly established until over an hour into the film. And that, I think, is the worst aspect of this movie.
I checked my watch. Kevin Costner's face, it probably pops on screen at the exact 1 hour mark, I think.
I think that that's the biggest problem with this movie. Is the first hour of it, I barely remember.
Yep.
The honest to God truth is I was in and out, like, awake.
Yeah, you were a little eepy.
I was eepy during that, because none of the characters are particularly well established in that first hour. There is a town that burns down. We see it get built up. We see raids of Native Americans. We see people riding on horseback. It is a Western, but none of the characters are... We don't learn anything about them in the first hour.
It's a lot of Western aesthetic with not a lot of storytelling effort. Well, lots of storytelling effort being put in, not in the right places or at the right pace.
Yeah. Because it isn't until that second hour of the film when Kevin Costner's character is introduced. Now, I think we can talk a little bit about the fact that he's not a well-established character.
I would agree.
He doesn't have a ton of information or backstory or personality.
Hayes Ellison.
Yes. But I think the movie gets significantly more interesting when you enter hour 2. Yeah. But what it means is that there's just kind of an hour of dead air for the first part of this movie. Yeah. And it really kills the pace.
It's hard to get your footing in the first hour of this. Because, that one... So we have that opening with Jenna Malone, and then we jump to an entirely different story, which is kind of like the name of the game of this film, is jumping to an entirely different story apropos of nothing. That is on the settlement area known as Horizon.
Yes. Which is the single core narrative thrust of this film, is that people all across the American West have received flyers for this sort of promised land where you can settle and raise your family, and it's the old American West, and it's going to be great.
But you can't do that, Tucker, because the Apache Native Americans, the Apache tribe that lives on this land, is not too fond of the white settlers coming in. I don't know if you know a lot about history, dear viewer, but many of them weren't. Many of the Native Americans weren't fans of the settlers, so... a lot of that first hour is spent on this, like, prolonged action sequence of the Apache tribe riding in the town and then brutally murdering and then trying to see our characters hide or survive or run away.
And it's interesting because it is a totally fine constructed action sequence, set piece. The burning buildings are impressive. There's people running everywhere, and there's horses, and there's arrows flying, and things exploding.
Flaming wagons tipping over.
This is the perfect example of why this movie doesn't work, especially in this first act, because that is an action set piece that would have been reasonably interesting. If you cared or knew any of the characters were being impacted by it. And also the fact that tangentially impacts the storyline going forward, but not directly for actually a good bit of the stories. And so it's just like, I'm watching this and I'm like, yeah, that's practical effects and lots of stunt acting, and
that's right.
But I don't care.
Yeah, because what comes out of this is 1.5 stories that we were talking about earlier. So there we have the Ladies Kittredge, which is Sienna Miller and her daughter. Sort of are part of this early Horizon settlement that is attacked, and so they tag along with the American Army, where our characters played by Sam Worthington and Michael Rooker come in, and they move on to an army base, and that sort of becomes like just kind of like a drama, just kind of like a relationship kind of drama, like a will they, won't they kind of thing with Sienna Miller and Sam Worthington.
It's a will they, won't they, and like the last 20 minutes of that story. Yeah. But after that point, it's just like, this is an army base. And these women are not used to an army base.
That's true. They aren't. And then the half story comes from a boy who, I don't think we ever see his parents or get to know his parents at all, but his parents are murdered by the Apaches who come in, and so he swears revenge and tags along with some other guys who want to go...
This is like a 12-year-old boy.
Yeah, it's like a 12-year-old boy who want to go seek revenge on the Apache tribe. Yes. And so he tags along with them, and their whole thing is that we're going to go kill Native Americans.
Yeah. And we call that a half story. Yeah. Because none of these characters are like ever established.
Yeah.
The little boy is interesting in concept. The idea of this kid leading revenge against a group of people that killed his parents. Like that's a totally serviceable narrative. But I don't know this kid. Frankly, I don't even know if I remember his name. Oh, I certainly don't remember his name. I don't know if we know it. And the supporting characters around him are not well established, and we also only see it like twice or 3 times. And then there's a third narrative, and
yes.
That isn't introduced until like 2 hours into the movie.
This happens exactly at the 2-hour mark, is when we see Luke Wilson. His face pops on screen. Lots of like new stories being introduced by man rides up on horse from the American desert or whatever. This is Luke Wilson leading people through Kansas, the Kansas Territory on the Oregon Trail. They're heading out to Horizon or somewhere, I guess. Probably Horizon. Will Patton is there.
Yeah, for a bit. Barely at all, actually.
Barely at all. I think the girl from Orphan is there.
Yes, she is, yeah. Isabel Furman.
Yes, that's right. And then some other people. A British couple is also the primary characters here, who, boy howdy, they don't want to work. They don't want to get their hands dirty. They're just sitting back and watching everybody else work. And Luke Wilson has to set them straight. And you see someone working, you go help them out.
Yeah.
And that is the most disconnected story for sure. There seems to be no connective tissue.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. No characters, no influence from the previous storylines.
Yeah. And that one is, I don't know, it just feels so separate.
Absolutely.
And a lot of these things feel so separate from each other. So it's kind of hard to you have to put all these different pieces in and weigh them as your opinion of the film. Did you like this story, this Luke Wilson one?
I'm realizing as we're going through it, the only one I found any narrative tension in was with Mary and with
Kevin Costner
and that whole storyline, because it is established in the first hour of the film in some way. It has some shootout, it has some action. I think it has a couple of the best performances in the film. It's certainly the one that shows up the most. That's second 2/3 of the film. But I don't actually think I like any of the other 2.5 storylines that much. They are fine enough as you're going into them, and especially coming out the other end, I'm like, I guess I'll tune back in to see what happens with these, because I think there's a possibility that they could continue on to become something more interesting. But especially that Oregon Trail storyline, again, it's kind of only interesting because when was the last time I saw an Oregon Trail storyline in a film?
Yeah,
it feels distinct because of that, but none of the characters are particularly well established, and especially that storyline only has 2 or 3 scenes.
Yeah,
and it doesn't go anywhere.
No, that's another thing too. Is that
this movie is only the first act or so of each of these stories.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I kind of said that when we walked out of the movie. It's the first act of all these stories, and so you don't feel the ramping up of anything really in the Oregon Trail story, or really the Kittredge family story.
Because
the Hayes Ellison and Mary one, the Kevin Costner one,
has a little more movement.
Has a little bit more movement. It's also the most classically Western movie story. Yeah. You got a lawman who kind of rides into town. He sort of stumbles into some trouble.
He's not a lawman.
Well, he's
he's a horse guy, maybe also class/criminal, but we don't know because we don't learn almost anything about his backstory.
He has some sort of moral assuasion, I would say. He is our classic Western lead. Kind of what my point was. And he feels drawn to help out the less fortunate, somebody who's in a spot of trouble.
Yeah.
And so he gets wrapped up in this whole mess. Except spoilers for Horizon.
We're already way down
1.
that hole.
At the end of the movie, Mary leaves.
Yeah,
she leaves Kevin Costner.
Kind of unclear why.
She also abandons her godson, I guess, with a Chinese immigrant family who popped up once.
They popped up once.
Yeah.
Now that storyline could be interesting. We don't know this family. We were never introduced there. The only thing we were introduced about their struggle is that because they are Chinese immigrant workers, they're, believe it or not treated fairly.
In 1860s America?
But that's cut the Kittredges, cut the Oregon Trail storyline. I don't give a shit. I want to hear about working on the railroad and the racism of how the Chinese immigrants are treated.
Kevin Costner works with them for a bit because he's trying to get money.
Yeah, for 30 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. But so it's, I guess from that standpoint, I'm well, what's gonna happen?
I have no idea.
Are we dropping the whole thing with Mary and her son and these brothers chasing after Kevin Costner?
No, but here's the problem. What that just means, though, is when we check back in 2 months for the second part of each of these stories, the storyline's going to be more fractured.
Yes.
The kid is with the Chinese immigrant family who's working on the railroad. Kevin Costner's off on his own, and Mary's off on her own. I think we'll be following all of them in some capacity.
Oh, my God.
But that just means we are going to be cutting around even more. And that, if it's not clear through everything we've been talking about today, is the main problem with Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1, is this is a mishmash of generally not generally, they are Western-themed stories.
Yes.
They are largely disconnected. We are ending a scene with a climactic moment of some tension, and then we cut to a totally different story. And so the pacing and the flow of this film is just continually stopped and started. And that is what I found most frustrating about it, is I found it very hard to maintain investment in any one of these storylines, because in any given one, it isn't clear if something narratively is going to be pushing things forward, if the character relationship are really going to build up in these scenes, because there are a lot of scenes that kind of just feel like they're there for a bit or for...
Yeah, this is my thing. I don't think this is a well-directed film. No. These storylines are sort of dropped and started at seemingly random points. A sequence or a check-in, if we want to call them that, with each of these narratives can last for 2 minutes or 25 minutes.
Yeah. Or we might we might go only 2 minutes without seeing a storyline, or we might go a half hour without seeing a storyline. Yeah. And that... And especially as you're reaching the end of the film and you realize, wow, I haven't seen this character in a while.
Yeah.
What's going on with them? And because the film just cuts around so much.
There's no place to, I feel like, get your hooks into Horizon at any given point. I think that is because of the general sort of like the general malaise and the like blandness across the board of the kind of the stories. That there's not one that particularly sticks out, or you don't spend enough time with any particular one to really like nail down. This is my favorite. I know these people. I like them for this reason and this reason.
Yeah, I agree. And here's what I'm going to, if I were Kevin Costner and I was given control of, let's just say 4 Western movies in the modern day.
Yeah.
And let's make them not let's make them not 3 hours long. Okay. That's already a plus.
Oh yeah.
I would have made this a 3-part anthology series.
Yeah, of course.
The full story of Hayes Ellison, the full stories of Lady Kittredge, the full story of the Oregon Trail. That's 3 separate films.
Yep.
And the third one, all the storylines converge and
Horizon HCU.
Is built. Ostensibly.
Yeah.
Because that is what this movie is introducing each of these storylines, so down the line, presumably, I think...
A settlement, or these stories can come together. Maybe, or maybe not. Yeah. We don't really know.
We don't know, and that is not made clear by where this film ends, which is in a, I think, pretty awesome, actually, hypercut of the shots from the next film.
It's just a trailer for the next one, and the trailer for this movie is also pretty good. Yeah, so it's just like, they're just selling you on the next thing. Of the action sequences that'll be interspersed across 3 hours. I think the next one's actually a little shorter. I think it's 2 hours 45.
Wow,
breezy. I don't know. I mean, it looks fine.
I started off this review. I want to be positive in some areas.
Okay.
I started off this review by saying I do think this movie isn't. I don't think it's poorly made. I think it's poorly paced, poorly constructed, poorly directed, but within any given scene, I think it's totally fine.
Sure.
I think the actors are all doing their best with what they're given. I think that the production design is actually quite fantastic. I think some really good shots. I think the color composition is there. I think the score is actually quite excellent. But it is in all of these things being like stained glass windowed together.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is just like a picture here and a picture there, and we're not stitching them together into a greater cohesive whole. That's where the film falls apart.
Yeah.
If you were to linearly show the Hayes Ellison storyline and you were able to better feel the progression of these characters and the tension, I think that would be a totally serviceable storyline. Yeah. Same with the Ladies Kittredge, same with the Oregon Trail. These are totally fine Western stories that are they're shot well, and like on the technical level, I think this movie is totally fine, if not good in some areas.
Yeah, like
but when you're watching this film, you're like, I can't get into this.
Exactly. moment to moment, it's like a 5 or a 6 out of 10.
Yeah.
As a whole package, I'm gonna give this a 4.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm gonna go about the same. 4.7. This is an underwhelming project.
It's extremely underwhelming to me.
But I think the thing that disappoints me most is it has. I think there's potential there. I see these actors. I see the idea of telling an epic Western story in the modern day. I'm like, these are pretty good ideas.
Yeah, like it's cool that Kevin Costner is bringing the Western back to the American moviegoer, because we say that these stories have been missing, but largely they've been moved to television things like Yellowstone, which is set contemporaneously, but the spin-offs of like 1893 and 1923.
Yeah, I think this is in like the 1850s.
Yeah, it starts in 1859, but then there's a time jump to 1863 because the Civil War is happening as well.
My bad.
Sorry,
I don't remember the years.
That could be a storyline in the next one. Civil War?
It is kind of, because the army people that the Kittredges are staying with have to go off to the war.
We'll probably see them die in the Civil War.
Yeah.
But anyway,
and then Kevin Costner will be able to direct a Civil War action sequence again.
Yeah,
which he did in Dances with Wolves,
which is pretty good.
Yeah. It's
anyway,
scene.
Not very good is what I would say. Ultimately,
it's not. But I hope it finds its audience, and I hope that the next ones are better. Yeah. Because I know all these characters now. I am reasonably compelled to see where it goes, just because this larger project fascinates me in an interesting way.
Yeah.
It's so different.
And you know what?
Releasing two within 2 months of each other is a really bold idea.
It is.
This is a bold and very passionate project.
Absolutely it is.
And I want to see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, as we both kind of said, like, the film kind of got better. You get more interested as it goes on, as you might expect with, following these stories. And so maybe we'll like part 2 better.
Yeah.
Maybe part 2 will be better as things get more established. But
we don't have to wait very long.
Yes, true. As a seed of the project, sort of a misstep, I would say.
That's
unfortunately. Okay. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.